let's go with the Brad Marchand trade first. I mean, this thing sent shockwaves through Bruins dumb. Um, Brad Marchand, among other moves, is sent to Florida. It seems like the particulars of this are trickling out in the last few days since it's gone down. But I guess just like, what was your guys' initial reaction, and then what is your reaction now as you've learned more and more from this move?
My initial reaction was that like being in sports media has ruined my life as far as a sports fan because I felt absolutely nothing. I had I had
I did too. I'm glad you said that. I did too.
I opened up my phone, I saw it, and I went, huh. Yeah, I didn't do anything. And I don't know if it's sports media, but I think I actually traced it back to the game 7 loss to the Blues. I think that was the turning point for me where I felt nothing since then. Nothing can bother me as much as that. All emotion, and then you just add on being around these guys, and you like the human factor ramping up, and you realize it's hard to attach as much emotion to it as you did when you were younger. So it's like, I don't know, the Marchand news came through, and I felt absolutely nothing and didn't care. It was interesting, but I'm like, he's old, like he's clearly on the back nine. They probably had to trade him. I thought it made sense, but I know Logan. I think you pay closer attention to the Bruins and the other players around the league than I do. So I'm curious on your thoughts.
Well, that your take veered into a very existential direction about sports
Yeah,
fanhood, which I will say, having entered my 30s now, I feel quite similarly.
yeah. Nothing
Um,
matters, and we're all gonna die.
yeah, I actually am. It's funny that you brought up the game 7 loss to the Blues because that's not what
You
turned
were
me
there,
into a
weren't you?
nihilist. I was there.
Oh,
That is not what turned me into a nihilist as it relates to sports, but it did signal the beginning of the end of this era of the Bruins, as far as I'm concerned. And we can get into that a little bit more later. I was ultimately not surprised that the Bruins ended up trading him. I remember when the rumor first came out of like, the Bruins would consider trading Marchand if they continue to be in a free fall. I wasn't that surprised by that. He's a 36-year-old who is a pending free agent on a team that's in a free fall and at the absolute best would back into the playoffs and probably get smacked by the Panthers or someone again in the first round. So if we're taking this is Brad Marchand, who's been with the team since the last time they won a cup thing. It's like, yes, from an emotional standpoint, that is obviously tough. From a pure hockey standpoint, it makes total sense. And the other thing I will say, the one big reaction that I've just not understood is the griping about the return. He is, again, a pending free agent. He is a straight rental. Like, there's a chance the Panthers keep him, but operate under the assumption he's a straight rental who is out week to week. You don't know when he's going to be back. You don't even know if you're going to have him for the playoffs. So the fact that the Bruins got a conditional pick that can turn into a first is a massive deal. But they were never going to get like multiple first round picks for him while he was injured. So the circumstances were just messy in the first place. But I also can't say I blame the Bruins for not wanting to, we have to know what the numbers are, but I don't blame them for not wanting to overextend for Brad Marchand's age 37 through 40 seasons or whatever. Like that, this team has hitched its wagon to so many bad contracts over the years that, I think it's perfectly sensible to not budge, even if the optics of it weren't great.
yeah. Well, I also think like they clearly did him a solid by sending him to a team he wanted to go to. And when you make that choice, you kind of, you make your bed and you have to live with it. Like they lose a little bit of leverage in that spot where I'm sure if they truly shopped him around and would have just said, well, he also had a no trade clause. So I don't know what
Yeah,
teams
and
were on that
that
list.
that messes with a lot.
But it's like, in hypothetical world where they were truly just sort of able to shop to the highest bidder, I'm sure they could have gotten a first round pick, but you lose some level, a lot of the leverage when you sort of say, "Hey, we're going to send you where you want," because then the Panthers kind of have you over a barrel at that point. But and speaking of the Panthers, and to the point I was saying earlier, I've seen a lot of people like all bemoaning the fact that he was sent to the Panthers. Because of how the Panthers have kicked the Bruins' ass the last couple of years, and they're like talking about it as if it's this like emotional gut punch, like as if they're the Yankees or they're the Lakers or they're the Jets, and it's like I know the Panthers have beat the Bruins the last couple of years, but it's not like they're the Canadians. Like I don't. I don't see why anyone
Yeah.
would care about that. Like, I don't.
But they
If
are.
I actually
You
think,
got you got to remember too. This generation of Bruins fans. I mean, the Panthers are there as a Bruins fan. The Panthers are the number one obstacle. The same way that maybe 8-9 years ago it was the Lightning. Um,
yeah,
you
the
know,
Bruins were that for the Hurricanes
yeah,
for a few years.
we think about no, because we're of a certain age where the Panthers are. I know in your guys' fandom, the Panthers have never really been relevant. I remember, the when they in the '90s they were relevant for a year, but the funny thing is that the Bruins are not a rival to the Panthers. If that makes any sense, they don't really even consider the Bruins to be relevant.
I,
So
Again,
go
the
ahead.
Bruins Carolina reference, like the
Yeah,
Bruins would sweep the Hurricanes all the time.
yeah. Um, I think that we are in a bad spot if I'm the sentimental one, because I did think I understand the business side of it. I think it was a good deal for the Bruins to get something out of Marchand, get something for Marchand, and I also thought it was a good move for the player. I also thought it was a good move for the team. That's a team that has a championship window right now, and they could use someone with some Stanley Cup experience to come in there and fill one of their middle or maybe bottom lines and get them over the top. All that being said, from a fan standpoint, I Marchand is one of my last favorite players, if that makes any sense. There's very few professional athletes that I legitimately love to watch, and I love the way they approach the game. I love the way they compete. For me, right now, it's really only him and Jalen Brunson. Like those are the only two professional athletes where I like, oh, there's a game on. I want to watch a game that they're playing in because I love their approach. I love everything about their attitude. So to that degree, it did stink, that I won't be able to watch when healthy Brad Marchand, 3-4 times a week now, to do that. The bonus for that though is that now I get to watch him do that maybe once every other week on national television, do that with another group of players who I think share his level of feistiness, to put it kindly. And I think that the Panthers with Brad Marchand in a either Eastern Conference Finals or Stanley Cup Final that's going to be a lot of fun to watch come the spring.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point about like the last favorite athletes, I guess if you're just sort of sticking in our generation, you're a little bit older than us, Ben, but I feel like, yeah, it's Marchand, it's Bergeron. Bergeron was a big hit for that. Maybe Pedroia, coming after Ortiz. Um, Patriots are different, right? If you remove Brady, like Edelman was maybe the last link to that really sort of mattered. Hard to come up with one in the Celtics because that's not like I don't think Marcus Smart was like on the level of those guys, even though he kind of felt like a true Celtic in that regard. I'm not sure if fans attached to Brown or Tatum in the same way that Red Sox fans attached to Pedroia. I don't know. Maybe I'm not making any sense, but it is true that like Marchand is one of the few last sort of favorite players from our generation.
I mean, it definitely shifts the culture of the team in my eyes.
Yeah.
And I liked what I saw from Pasternak in Tuesday's game. I mean, he seemed like someone who, for the first time, was acting like it was his team, and it's kind of a shame that it had to wait until Bergeron and Marchand and Krejci and those guys were gone for him to kind of look like that. But I was a little skeptical about like whether they actually will have a captain for the near future. But at least given the effort that they showed last night and the attitude, I think that this team is going to be interesting to watch the rest of the way. And I don't think it was going to be interesting to watch if it was necessarily the Coyle Marchand show the rest of the way.
I totally agree with that. I mean, they need a a fundamental shift in philosophy, which is where I go to the take of like they need wholesale changes in management. But the reason that yeah, you like that wholesale changes, Cody. I'm right too. So I'm glad earlier that you brought up the point about losing game 7 of the cup final, because to me that signaled a massive shift where they decided they just needed to be like this bruising physical team to play against. I think the most telling move of that entire generation was a 1-for-1 swap of Nick Ritchie for Danton Heinen. Like that right there tells you all you need to know about. They took a guy who was a responsible two-way forward and replaced him with just a bruising guy who would maybe get you 25 points in a season, and the signing was a disaster. And they started shifting towards that philosophy of we need to get bigger. We're losing in the playoffs, we're getting pushed around. No, the reason that they lost to the Blues were because they had no secondary scoring and they were shuffling David freaking Backus and Carson Kuhlman on the second line of the Stanley Cup during the Stanley Cup
I
final. Like
forgot
that's
about
why they
David
lost.
Backes.
Yeah, I remember it was like, all right, in goes David Backus, like here goes nothing. And so that, and that's why Nikita Zadorov is here. They decided that they need to be this big physical team. Well, the thing they always lack is freaking skill. And so that's why, like, I like Coyle, good, strong player, but I've got no issue swapping him with Casey Middlestat because there's at least some skill. Like you saw the goal, I think it was the tying one, the tic-tac-toe goal with, I think it was Lindholm, Middlestat, and then Pasternak. And it was like, I haven't seen the Bruins, like a Bruins line that does not feature both Marchand and Pasternak move the puck like that in God knows how long. And so I'm not dismissing the need for them to have, these strong physical players. But when you blow every first round pick on guys like Johnny Beecher in the hope that they're like a 20 point a season guy who can just like fill a third line role at best, like they need to stop drafting like that, which is why Sweeney needs to be gone. And there's nothing wrong with having a fair amount of skill in your middle six. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't give a shit that Casey Middlestat can't do a pull up. Like, I really don't. He can move the puck better than anyone else on the roster right now, except for Pasternak.
Yeah, and the other reason that I like the moving Marchand, even if I don't like moving Marchand in a vacuum, is that this forces their hand. They've acted on the coach, they've acted on the core set of players. It's like, if this is still not working, the only place to go after this is the front office. Like, you can't continue to punt things outside of Sweeney or even Neely, because you've punted everything at this point. They're the only things left. They're the only balls left to kick.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, never mind the fact that, like, first of all, this is a take some of you might roll your eyes at, but like the Mitchell Miller thing was fireable in and of itself.
whoa, whoa,
I
whoa,
think
whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm
that
just kidding.
showed.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I agree with you. I thought that was and that
Yeah.
was one of the most tone deaf business moves in like not just in sports, like in the history of running a business. Like, that was like, do you not have like the internet?
Well, because and it was
the entire vetting process into question about every single free agent. Like, if they were the aloof tone that they took to all of that was just insanity to me. So
and
go
I
ahead,
think
Dakota.
I just think that would have been a tone deaf stupid thing to do anytime, but especially like at the time when it happened, when like people like were like more sensitive than ever before, but like culturally, like it was especially tone
And the
deaf.
team was flying high, right? Wasn't
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
they were. It was bizarre on so many levels, but to me, so like that would have been an opportunity to get out from Sweeney. But ultimately, it's like, how is he the one who has averted blame in all of this? Because it's not just Jim Montgomery and tearing down the roster. Like, they let Bruce Cassidy basically get run out of town by the players, and poetically he goes and he wins a cup the next year. That should have signaled some very big culture issues. That should have called into question about where the direction of the team was going. The idea, they held on to the idea that it was going to be the Chara Bergeron Bruins forever. The second that guys started taking bigger deals and you started having these contracts that were over 10 million, those days were over. So they needed to start to figure out how to build a roster better, which I think exposed Sweeney. And then you look at the fact that he's tried to change the identity of this team so many times and to no avail. Like, they need a different voice in there.
What they also need to do: stop building through Sweden. I've,
I
I've just,
actually,
I was thinking about this yesterday,
I'll
and I
let
was
you
like,
walk yourself into that first.
there are so many, like, between both Lindholms, the Carl Soderberg thing back in the day, Sagan for Louis Eriksson. What was it like their
Joakim
first pick?
Nordstrom,
Yeah, their first pick a few years ago on Axel Anderson
Lysell.
You know what they say? You
and
got two Lindholms.
Axel Anderson and Lysell. Yeah, it's like I'm just can we maybe look elsewhere? But
Right.
my
Cody is anti-Swede.
yeah, I am anti-Swede. I did for a moment. I bought into the Carl Soderberg hype back in the day.
A
The one thing,
productive NHL player for a while,
yeah.
the Carl Soderberg.
Um, I was thinking too. What the one kind of bummer about the Bergeron thing or the Marchand thing, at least for me, is I'm a sucker for records. I don't know why. I don't care about much in this world, but I like records. And what? So he leaves with 422 goals. That's 5 behind Bergeron for third place, 57 behind Esposito for second. I'm not sure whether he would have gotten to Busick at 545. So it would have been like around 133. I don't know if he had that much juice in him, but ultimately it probably doesn't matter anyway because Pasternak, as long as he stays with the Bruins, would have eclipsed him anyway. I mean, Pasternak's only 41 behind him. So, but it would have just, he leaves 5 away from being top 3 in team scoring history, and he was probably a shoe-in to hit second. So, again, I like records, so
Yeah.
kind of a bummer.
He's an all-time Bruin, and I think on the flip side, it's not. I saw on Reddit someone was talking about they were crying in North Station when they heard the news. That's a little bit over the top. On the flip side, he is an all-time Bruin, saying like, "Oh, it's only Brad Marchand. It's not like it." It's like, no, it's not like it's Johnny Busick. No, it is. Like he's not in like the Orr stratosphere, but no, he's up there. He's at least Rick Middleton. If we retire Rick Middleton's number, who I really like Rick Middleton. Marchand's an all-time Bruin without a doubt.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, if
like
he
this is
doesn't
like
play,
I was gonna say it's interesting that the difference, like when a trade is more sad, or the reaction's more sad than angry. Like this, it seems people are just kind of bummed, and then whereas like the Mookie Betts trade was pure anger, right? And I'm not sure, and I
Yeah.
don't think people considered Mookie Betts an all-time Red Sox. It was more he would have been an all-time.
That's a
Red
really
Sox.
good point,
That's a-
Dakota, because Logan's about. I think it's a really good point because for me, this trade personifies all of the mistakes that they have made over since 2019, or even before 2019, because it's like it didn't have to get to this point. We could have gotten to the point where Brad Marchand was aging gracefully, and they had another strong core, with McAvoy and Pasternak, and it hasn't been that way. So as a result, they need to trade him away for a second round pick.
they cannot draft.
Oh no.
That's why Sweeney can't be here. I mean, how is the fact that the last like legitimate homegrown player that they've had who's like a bona fide core piece is McAvoy, who got drafted 9 years ago now? Like it's just been so lean. Lysell hasn't worked out. Like Beecher's a fine player, but he's a bottom 6 guy, which he always projected to be. It's just an absolute debacle. You cannot have Sweeney running the draft again. But as it relates to Marchand and his standing, in Bruins lore, I if he doesn't play in Bergeron's shadow, I mean, for one, he probably wins a few Selkies, but I don't think he has gotten enough credit for his ability as a defensive player. Like, he is an incredible two-way player. Like, watching him on the penalty kill, when it was him and Bergeron as the 2 penalty killing forwards, like, that was some of the most incredible hockey I've ever watched. Just the puck possession whenever they'd get it and the ability to score. Like, it felt like they were playing 5-on-5. So I agree with the point about like Rick Middleton and whatnot. Like if he clears the bar, Marchand, it's not even a thought. Now I'm a little on a different page than you guys in terms of the reaction. So I feel like I have seen, like, I think I ultimately land at a different place because I feel like I've seen anger. Like I feel like fans are recognizing that this is a microcosm of everything that's gone wrong. That there's no help coming because they haven't been able to draft in over 5 or 6 years. But I've sensed that as like unbridled rage was the reaction I've kind of seen, more so than like there is this sadness. And I think certainly now there's the sadness, but in the initial 24 48 hours, like I feel like I saw a lot of like angry condemnation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so because I think more people look at this trade as with understanding why it happened and seeing why it is the right thing to do than did with like the Mookie Betts trade. Even though like I remain a partial defender of that trade, but I think there are far more people that look at this one and go like, I get it, but it sucks and it didn't have to be this way. But maybe you've seen more like outrage than I have. I haven't seen it.
I also I just think that's a tough comparison too, because we're talking about like Brad Marchand at the end of his career versus mortgaging, 13 years of Mookie Betts. Like to me, I understand the rage more. And I don't know. Like
Okay.
I get being sad about the Marchand thing, but I feel like that hasn't been as much of what I've seen, but maybe we're just looking in different places.